in Africa, we have very limited locations that have gone very vertical. If you look at Lagos, Nigeria, Abuja, Cairo, Cape Town, name it.
Africa is one of the places where urbanization is going on the most in the world. However, we are also leading when it comes to housing deficit and financing for housing, according to the IFC.
Do you think African cities are growing faster than their infrastructures?
Yeah, I do. Culturally and contextually, Africa has been a continent of where we have communal living. Most people, due to urban migration, came into the cities. We find that a lot of our cities are becoming overcrowded.
It's the way that we live. Somebody leaves their village, comes to a city, and instead of thinking about to stabilize before they get a one-bedroom or maybe somewhere to lay their head, they're already thinking about to give birth. So,
one final question: what does an ideal vertically built African city look like to you? Hi everyone, my name is Architect Oluwagbemisola Idowu. I'm a senior architect and associate partner here at the Building Practice Limited. This afternoon, we'll be having a very interesting conversation. With me here are my colleagues.
I'm Tayo Boyega, and I'm an architect and associate partner with the Building Practice Limited. It's a pleasure to discuss today.
I'm Architect Bodiario, an senior associate at the Building Practice, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Today we'll be discussing why African cities should build vertical, the urbanization trend. Interestingly, in Africa, we have very limited locations that have gone very vertical. If you look at Lagos, Nigeria, Abuja, Cairo, Cape Town, name it, just take a mental scan of major African cities. How many high-rise developments can you visibly see that are there being developed? So it's very interesting that we are having this conversation today, and I have two seasoned architects with me. So we'll have Architect Boyega opening the floor.
Thank you so much, Bimi. And it's an interesting conversation that we are having right now because Africa as a whole, we know that we are a continent that is due for more. And globally, Africa and Asia are the fastest developing continents in the world. Africa is one of the places where urbanization is going on the most in the world. However, we are also leading when it comes to housing deficit and financing for housing, according to the IFC. So urbanization is at the center of what is driving Africa forward. But at the same time, how invested are, the government, how friendly are the policies for this type of development that we expect. So Africa is fast developing, it's even underdeveloped to a great extent. And we believe that as much as people are moving from rural areas to cities to seek more opportunities, urbanization is going to be a continuous trend in Africa. And with the way the cities are becoming denser, it is just not avoidable. It's unavoidable for us to go vertical, for us to be able to manage our cities and plan properly. So Africa has to build vertically in our cities. It is important here.
Thank you so much for that very interesting take. I'll have Architect Bode with your opening remark.
Yes, as my colleagues have said, for urban cities, our cities in particular, I know from culturally and contextually, Africa has been a continent of where we have communal living. From vernacular architecture, we normally live in communities and horizontally. So, but for our cities, after the dawn of independence for most African countries in the early 1960s, we find out that when state capitals were created and economic activities kicked off, for the cities, we became the seats of power politically and economically. You find out that because most people, due to urban migration, came into the cities, we find out that a lot of our cities are becoming overcrowded. So in a bid to properly house people, you find out that you have to go vertical because those state capitals, those urban centers, don't have the luxury of land in our hinterlands of the suburban areas. So you have to house people vertically as opposed to horizontally. in other parts of the country and the continent. So I think there's a need, there's a dire need for us to house people vertically in our urban centers.
All right, still on the topic, do you think African cities are growing faster than their infrastructures?
Yeah, I do. Given the state of the continent, we are an emerging economy. There's still a debt of infrastructure in the continent as a whole, and in some parts of our major cities. We found out that the major driving forces for cities, major infrastructure and utilities needed for cities are still lacking in some of our major African cities. So there's that dearth of infrastructure that is required and needed for that the level of development and construction and urbanization that is needed in the continent. So I think there's a dearth of infrastructure. We see it in some of our cities, power, road connection, rail, water, access to these things, and transportation. So I think there's a dearth of some of the major infrastructure needed in our cities to properly house people. So I think there's a dearth there, which is actually hampering the need for us to build vertically.
Okay, thank you. Rightly stated. Why do you think African cities grow faster than their infrastructures?
I think the first thing is cultural and social perspective. It's the way that we live. From time, people give birth at will. There's no family planning. There's no birth control. In a sense, it's not really embraced in an environment. And I think recently I'm reading that the population of China, it's even dropping. The number of people willing to give birth in Korea, it's dropping. And these are developed nations, but we are developing, you find somebody who works as a house staff, having 4 kids, and maybe the boss that they work with has 2 kids. So we have this mindset of seeing giving birth as a social status. People want to give birth to an increased number of children because of political status, maybe because of the way they are seen in society. So as a cultural and a social effect, we give birth, and this in turn affects the entire population growth. People do not really put a forefront in their thinking how they are going to take care or cater for people that they give birth to. A lot of people don't embrace family planning and birth control, so just give birth as they deem fit, and this automatically just results in growing number of people, and the population keeps growing. And I believe that this has an effect on the urbanization. Somebody leaves their village, comes to a city, and instead of thinking of how to stabilize before they get a 1 bedroom or maybe somewhere to lay their head, they're already thinking of how to give birth. So this in turn, affects how our growth in population, and in turn how dense our urban areas are. So I believe it's more of a social and cultural effect on and how we behave on this here.
Thank you. So I'm thinking, if you feel that, taking from the points that you just shared, we have different classes. You have the low income earners, you have middle income earners, and you have high income earners. From our client, it is the given the what is most common is that you find people who are mostly in the low income earners build more, having more large family numbers. Do you think building vertical will how do we solve the problem of affordability given the different social classes that we have?
That's a very good, very good question. Well, it comes back to education. So it's education that will tell a low-income earner if he has that level of education or it has the right information available to him, that he will know that he has access to family planning, that he knows that he can space his children. It's education that makes the difference between the low-income earner and the middle-income earner space their children or have fewer children. So it comes back to education, and also that comes back to the government. If the policy has to be driven from the government. So in terms of affordability, there's a part the government has to play, which is social housing. They cannot be leaving to just the private hands, the developers and the financiers and the real estate. Though they are for profit, government has the part to play in and around Africa to provide the right housing needs for its population. Government is there to serve people. So we cannot leave all of the housing development to contractors and realtors and developers. They are finance and capital driven. So government has to play, not just in providing those housing, but also setting the environment, the policy in place to make it accessible. We have access to mortgage schemes, access to low income housing, access to lower rent. You don't have to own your home. If you can have access to a good rent where you can stay and a place to lay your head, it's also policy that is being set by government. So I think in terms of affordability, irrespective of the class level, there's a part that government has to play to drive policy and to make access to housing available to all.
Good. Thank you. Care to share?
So to add to that, the key thing is the government needs to step in because from our experience in building practice with building vertical, most of the projects that we're working on, they are private driven, and these are economic and finance and profit driven development. People are trying to get more money for whatever it is that they are building. So we need to come in a situation where the government steps in and they say, okay, we can also provide housing and see how those ones can be driven by solution, not by profit. For example, if we go into what is going on in Africa currently, the Lagos State budget for housing schemes in 2026 is 101.6 billion naira, which is about $75 million. It sounds like a lot, but I think one of the projects that we are working on Bodilon in Ikoyi, the total project cost is about 50 billion naira estimated. That is half of what Lagos State has budgeted for 2026 for solving housing problems. So if you split that in, if you put that in two, it means they can just build two if they are to go vertical. So these things are very, very important in what we're talking about. And if you look at Cairo, for example, in Egypt, they have about $286 million for the housing budget between June 2025 to June 2026, and that is so much more than what we are budgeting in Lagos. And if you go to Cape Town, they have about $365 million budgeted for housing. So you see that as much as we need housing solutions to come, the government needs to have a robust plan to be able to step in so that people can look away from private sector solutions, because that is profit driven, and the government can come in to say, okay, we actually want to solve housing problems. And we know that going vertical is expensive. And there will be a class of people that might still wonder, how would I be able to live in this type of building? The answer is simple. The government put the policy in place. They ensure there are systems and schemes and policies that can aid people to pay over a very long period of time. And also, it can be controlled. That is to say, if you are within a class, there is a family size that you can have in certain locations where you have to live in a vertical building, and there are a set of social and cultural changes that have to be encouraged, because it's about us being ready to do what is required for us to solve the problems that is at hand. So the government have a huge role to play, and people also have to be ready to be socially malleable, to let some habits go and be able to do the work that is required to solve these problems. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Birgel, for that very robust response. Okay, so if we take a mental scan of the globe, who really benefits from skyscrapers?
I mean, we believe that. I personally believe, for example, I see Lagos, Nigeria, as the economic capital of Nigeria, and if you look at the people getting into the business, for example, middle class, low class, and you don't have any business in the core Atlantic, for example. Also, if there's an IRS provided there by private personnel, it's in for profit. So it's more of a profit driven system and operations right now from what we know, even if you go to other cities in Africa. But when we talk of urbanization and housing itself, it has the potential to bring the middle and the low class into the system to benefit from. Even if it's a one bedroom apartment in a tall building that is close to where you work, you can benefit from it. But I'm not sure a developer or a private housing mogul is looking into that kind of solutions. For example, um, for the class I fall in and for what I am, I should be living in 1004, a couple of minutes drive to where I work in Lekki here. And if I get that as a government solution and I can afford to pay for it over years, I would take it because it solves my problem, it reduces my stress. But the thing is, if you look at the height of the building in 1004, it doesn't really solve the problem for so many people. Those that are living there are not even the class of people that should be living there. The people that do the work, that are healthy, that are agile, that are young, they should be the ones. People should not be rushing from the outskirts of town to get to the city center and the economic centers to do the job. They should be able to live closer. So these are things that can benefit the common people and the people that actually do the working class. Um, when we talk of going high, but currently for what we have in most of Africa and Nigeria in particular, it is benefiting the private pockets and people that can actually fund this type of project. So it's more of a profit scheme right now, as opposed to a housing solution. Yeah.
On that thought, so I'm going to throw this as an open question. Do you think going vertically or building vertically rather um, creates or worsens social inequality?
Um, it's I think it could work both ways. It's not a it's not a it's not only on the steps of the developers or the capital uh, capitalists or people, the developers who do those private owned projects. The government, like I said, I will mention earlier, the government can also step in and play a part in building those houses that's also accessible to the low and middle income earners. So going vertical is not it's not only for the high class in the society. Government can play a part. There are several examples of social projects of residential development in and around the world where the government are coming to play a part to solve that problem. Areas where they have limited land, for example, the government comes in, creates apartment blocks, mid-rise, low-rise, high-rise buildings to solve those social problems. Because they've come to understand that it is the people having access to the working class that drive economic activity in the cities. Now, I'll mention our topics in the urban centers. If you have an urban center where economic activity is driven and create GDP for the country, it behoves on the government to create one of the basic needs of man, shelter, to create housing and shelter for the able-bodied men and the working class to drive economic activities in and around the city centers. So an urban center, which is supposed to be the central business district or the driving force for economic activities for a country, especially in Africa, access to housing in and around those city centers should be affordable, should be accessible, so that, like we mentioned earlier, you don't have to travel long distances to do your work. You can walk in. We have several multi-use spaces where apartment complexes are walking distance from the office spaces. So I think it can work both ways. There's a part for government to play with social housing. And also we've seen around the world now, even in developed countries, where high-rise building, you make a political statement. So government goes into a project to make a political statement because it's a monument and edifice. You can see the point to it. Case in point is the Burj Al Arab when it first came on stream. It was first of all a political statement. It was also used by the government to drive economic activities, tourism to the country, and with that, new developments came on stream. So government also has a part to play. There are various ways government can come in and make that housing affordable, so that that gap per se is not it's not a huge lacuna. Because if you don't solve that problem, you find the issue of urban sprawl, which is what you're also trying to solve with going vertical, where you don't have unchecked uh, horizontal developments in and around city centers because those people are not catered for. We have a very close example here to home with what's happening right now in Lagos, Nigeria, with Makoko development, where the government is trying to rehabilitate and crying out urban renewal in the area. But you also have to cater and find long-term solutions so that the problem doesn't crop up again. So yes, it's a both side of the coin solution that has to be adopted for so that that gap, that social class and that social gap is enough. Because at the end of the day, even the rich also have to be served by the poor. So your drivers, your cooks, all those people that service those the city centers, they also have to have access to some of these facilities so that the gap is not there's no marginalization and there's no we don't have an issue where the gap is yes, the inequality gap increases.
His response is actually making me going to leading me to the next question. So, do you also want to add to it?
Just a bit because I think what we do at building practice is very important to bring into this conversation now, because when you talk about inequality, sometimes we look at the economic and social class of people. But one of the things we try to do at building practice is to make our buildings accessible. Someone on a wheelchair is coming into a building, and you find out there are so many public buildings around us here that they don't take it into context. So when people have to travel vertical, it even makes it worse because you get to buildings, the lift is not working and stuff like that. So sometimes you can widen that inequality gap from this perspective. And in terms of affordability, like you mentioned, if the government steps in and you close the gap between the private funding and the public funding, then the government begins, people see that, okay, the government, they are trying to solve our problem. So they know, okay, when I want to think of buying a house or maybe getting into a mortgage, I can get into an high-rise building, but I don't have to pay through my nose and pay for with my life for it. So we can, there are ways that this can, be done to close the gap, to saturate the market with a lot of these things. If they are going on at the same time, it will automatically control the pricing and the market. So, but it's a long-term solution, and it requires a willing government, not a government seeking to also, drive profit for the government and generate revenue by housing. Housing is not for you to make money. Housing is principally for you to solve problems. And if you take it, with the expertise that we have at building practice and the knowledge that we have about this type of buildings, we can ensure that we prefer solutions to government that are willing, private people that are willing, and also catering to people that are even in the inconsidered class, people that need accessibility into buildings. We ensure everybody is captured, and even for those that are doing it for money, we also see how we can solve these problems for them and ensure that there's a total solution here.
Interesting. Something on the top of my mind is, in as much as we are trying to bridge a lot of deficiency gaps, do you think Africa as a whole has the infrastructure to build vertical? Do you think Africa as a whole, I'm going to rephrase that question, do you think Africa as a whole has the infrastructure to support vertical urban growth?
So when we say Africa as a whole, most of the countries in Africa are underdeveloped. The ones that are doing well in terms of their country capitals, they are developing. So as a whole, it's the focus on infrastructure here, because when you are building these type of mega structures that have environmental impact, They have impact on the economy and the social and the cultural impact that they have. The government must be ready to invest in infrastructure. For example, if you're trying to get into the center of Lagos, and when I'm talking maybe VI and Ikoyi in terms of business, everyone should be encouraged not to drive. So the infrastructure is in place. Then you come into somewhere that is already tight like VI and Ikoyi, and you put in another high-rise structure that is going to bring in more people and more cars. Do we have wider lanes? Can the city be cyclable? Let's make room for people to ride their bicycles to work. If you say I'm living closer to work, I can take a bike instead of driving a car. And also, there's the power and the drainage problem. There has to be huge investment in drainage infrastructures for things like this. There's waste management problem. These are things that private individuals cannot solve for a serious government. The government needs to get serious with things like this. So in terms of readiness, it is in resources, it is in funding, it is in planning. But we cannot escape going vertical because we have the problem at our hand, and we need to see that infrastructure is being built continuously. Example of this is what happened in Nigeria in the early stages, when the capital was moved from Lagos to Abuja. There was opportunity to prepare Abuja to be a city. We had urban planners like Kenzo Tanje come in and help with the city planning, and it is continuous. If you go to Abuja today, they are still doing roads, they are still doing drainages, planning for the future. Right? So for cities that are dense, Lagos, Cape Town, and Cairo, the infrastructure, resources and investment needs to be continuous to ensure that by the time this urbanization gets to its peak, maybe like 2030, the government and the city, they are ready to take care of the problems that is going to come with this growth. So yes, infrastructure might not be there, but even if we have something that is growing, it must continue to grow at a fast pace. Investment in infrastructure is one of the easiest ways to prepare for going vertical.
For me, I'll just add, yes, can South Africa have the infrastructure to support going vertical? Yeah, at the moment, not a lot of African urban centers have that. But I also see it as an opportunity for us to access that. When you're starting from scratch, you can plan. So it's different from a situation where you already have a city center that is already existing and you want to have new vertical developments. Does that city infrastructure, can they support those new development coming on stream? So I see it as a half glass full situation. If you have those infrastructure not available right now, it's an opportunity for the government to come in and plan. And another plan, design new cities. You have urban planners coming to design new cities. The new cities can spring up from the mistakes of the existing ones. We're seeing right now, Lagos, Nigeria, although they are totally different. So collaboration with government, with the government, a private new city in Victoria Island, they call Atlantic. So the government and in partnership with private sector can come in and plan. When you have a blank slate, there's the limitations and the are limitless. So it's an opportunity for governments and private sectors to come in and put heads together and create new cities. It has been done before in many of our African capitals where other suburbs were created out of design. Look at Accra, for example, Temale, all those other cities that were created to support those urban centers. In Cairo right now, there's a totally new state capital being developed with huge amounts of resources to drive new infrastructure. Not that Cairo initially wasn't good enough, but the government has planned ahead of time. They're looking at the population, they're looking at tourism, they're looking at how to expand infrastructure to support that new city. So I see it as a half glass full situation where there's an opportunity there for us to, as an emerging economy and emerging continent in the new frontier, to plan our cities properly and take cue from the mistakes of those that have gone ahead of us.
Profound. Thank you. So how do you think vertical cities impact transportation and traffic? Dirty December just passed. We know what we saw in Lagos. We know how things were in Accra. So how do you think building vertically impacts transportation and traffic?
Um, mentioning Dirty December is it's like the peak of living in Lagos, where you see that is the city actually ready for the economic growth that could happen. For other cities in Africa, I believe they don't face on the level that we face in Lagos. And I think one of the things that are important, and I think the government also encourages this, is before you begin to go vertical and build, this huge number of apartments and increase, the density of an area, there should be an environmental impact, analysis. There should be a traffic impact analysis. All of these things will tell the story of how what you are bringing into an environment is going to impact it. There are government people that run these services. There are private people that run these services. But it is important that you have professionals that hold your hands. And at building practice, we have a firm understanding of these things. You can't just go and plant a high-rise building somewhere without checking how it impacts the environment. So these are things that are very important, because you're going to cause traffic problems, you're going to impact on the infrastructure and the resources, the waste management and all of that. There's going to be a huge impact on that environment, and the analysis, the evaluations, all the things that need to be carried out from a technical and social and cultural perspective, they need to be they need to be carefully carried out. And it's also important that we see that we don't have cities that are ready for the type of urbanization that we are experiencing and expecting. Um, there is no way you're going to encourage building vertical and not encourage, driving less. The carbon footprint, the number of cars that come out of the building, they are going to contribute to that in the environment. We need cities that are cyclable. People should be able to cycle to work. People should be able to live and work in the same building. People should be able to, you know, cater to their problems within a limited kilometer coverage. The transport, the area, your solution should be around you. So in terms of readiness and the impact on traffic, it's going to be huge if we continue as we are. But there are answers, there are solutions, and I believe for projects where we have worked on, Pistoa, Body Lot 48, and all the other ones, number 20 Alexandra, and all these projects, we are looking at how these buildings they impact the environment. So it is very important that we look at these things, and people that are getting into these solutions and businesses, they need to value environmental impact analysis, traffic impact analysis, and the general impact on the environment and the neighborhood. Yeah, thank you.
Do you want to give us a take?
Yeah, just to add to what Agregbega said, it's very, very important that, like we do here, we at Building Practice, we pride ourselves of, we don't just design, we design according to standards and codes. So part of our requirements when we are doing new development, we always refer to what does the code says. And in the initial part of our design development, one of the things we do is the EIA and TIA traffic power assessment. We have a couple of developments with new cities right now, trade zones. We have 2 free trade zones that we're looking at right now, and the Alaro cities are just coming up. Part of our projects there, we do traffic impact analysis on those sites, environmental impact analysis on those sites, and to see what will be the worst and best case scenario for in and around access to the development and the building that's coming on stream. A building is a location, it's a point in a place. How do you get there? So how do you get there is one of the very, do you have pedestrian, do you have cycling, you have trains, you have bus stops. So how do you get to your location, and how do you design movement in and around that location? So it's very, very important that when you have in vertical developments, especially in urban centers and city centers, that, like as Gloria mentioned, that access to services and access to facilities is within a block or 2 from you, so that you don't have to travel long distances to access the things you need. to as a resident of that environment or in that building.
Absolutely, because I live it's a 45 minutes drive from where I live to where I work. But every day I spend a cumulative of 4 hours in traffic. So at least with the advent of vertical cities, and if these things will, happen as quick as we hope that it should, it will help solve this traffic problem. So that's very profound. Thank you. So a lot has been said since the conversation started. Build vertical, go vertical, build vertical, go vertical. What policies do you think must change if vertical cities have to succeed in Africa? What policies do you think needs to change or needs to be changed, altered, or removed for vertical cities to succeed in Africa?
I think building and planning regulation is at the forefront of this. For cities across the world and even across Africa, there are different building regulations that guide what you can do. There are places where the homeowners or landowners are even advised to get into collaboration with people that can bring in finance to build vertical. But coming to Lagos, Nigeria, I think the highest points we can build are in Eco Atlantic currently, but I think generally on Uzumba and Alexander and Bodilon, you can go as high as 110 meters, and we're even hearing that there are conversations going on to increase that, because that's what we should be aiming for. We are building a city that is primed for growth. We shouldn't limit people that want to go as high as they can, as long as there are solutions that are ensured and regulated to ensure that those buildings don't become problems. So the policies around building regulations, they need to change. The cost of approval, because it's one of the things that people may not be aware of, but the cost of building approval is a lot in Lagos, because people are trying to finance and start their projects, but you realize that huge of that finance also has to go to the building approval. The benefit for the state is unlimited. The state is going to make money when people build this kind of infrastructure. So the state should not be afraid. The revenue is going to come, but I think we should collaborate more with people that want to build, and we should encourage homeowners. And there's also a system that I saw when I traveled to Dubai, where infrastructures can be prepared. The government can come in, they don't have to fund the entire project. They can locate the land, and we can have infrastructures that span streets where the parking infrastructure can be below ground, and the preparation for the type of structure to go up can be prepared. So we can have the basement and the parking levels developed by the state government, and you can have private owners now coming to build the towers. So the parking is underground. You don't really see the cars. You just see people going in and out of buildings. And these are ways the government can collaborate with people that are ready to build, as opposed to being a stumbling block in their way. So there are policies that need to change around, building and land regulations, the height limits, and also approval processes, and the financing and encouragement and access to building and collaboration within different homeowners and landowners and government and financiers. All of this can be put together, and I believe that the more flexible and more interested the government is in this type of development, we can do so much more. And I believe even beyond Lagos, in other cities across Africa, some of these solutions are already in place, and there are cities that have been war torn that they are coming back together and trying to develop. So there's still so much to do in Africa, all across West Africa. It's very important that the government takes the position and drive this here. Thank you.
Okay. Conclusively,
Yeah.
one final question. What does an ideal vertically built African city look like to you?
For me, I could say, because of the peculiar challenges we have in our urban centers, where the land is limited, we made the point that it makes sense to go vertical. as opposed to going horizontal. But I think we can also transfer our cultural and vernacular architecture to our vertical architecture. So, for example, having the way we live on vernacular African architecture, where you have communal living, you have a Oba with a palace, and they have settlers and the subjects that are living around that settlement in villages and towns. I think we can also translate that vernacular architecture to a communal living, to a vertical development. So I think the most ideal would be a mixed-use development where you have multi-levels that serve various functions, but there's still interaction vertically. So like we normally do here, we have a couple of our developments, mid-level and high-rise, where we have a communal floor, several communal floors where you have access to communal facilities like a swimming pool, a recreation space, a playground, shopping centers, malls, and you have offices. I also have residential development and penthouse in the same vertical development, the same residential block. So I think it's a multi-use space. That will be the most ideal, just taking cue from what we do so that there's interaction. You're not just enclosed or in a particular space and you don't interact with your neighbors or interact in the building. You have to move in and around that structure to have access to what you need. So I think a very ideal would be a multi-user, multi-level story building where you can have access to various facilities inside of the building.
Thank you so much for that very profound response. You have something to add?
I think in closing, I'll just say we can't escape building vertical because the land you see today, they'll be gone tomorrow. And with the resources and the interest of the private sector in cities and economic centers, there's going to be more development. People are looking for money. People are creating businesses. The resources are booming. So it means that housing need will continue to be a subject. And I believe that the earlier the government steps into taking up their position and their role as, what we call politicians in Yoruba is Oshelu. That is the people that do the government, that build the government. The government needs to take their role as the city builders and see that they can drive so much more in terms of building cities. And I believe that the vertical development and building is not something we can escape. And like my colleague said, the ideal style is for us to have mixed use systems. You can reduce movement around the city when you can incorporate what people need in one building. And it's something that I look forward to. And building practice is ready to take their position in Africa at large and in Nigeria to be able to offer the services and, just drive the mindset and the technical and the professional needs for all of this to become a reality. And we are primed for a successful journey in our cities all across Africa, and we believe that so much more will be done, and we can't wait to play our role in this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aked. So much more can be done. And it's a wrap on today's session. Your proud host, very humbled. It's an honor to have anchored today's session. Again, thank you so much to Aked and Aked Bode. It's been a very wonderful session. And thank you until we meet next time. Today's session also was brought to you by the Building Practice Limited. Thank you.